Welcome. I'm Kevin Mitchell, the Global Practice Leader for Building Services Engineering at Mott MacDonald, and I'm also President-elect of CIBSE, the Professional Institution for Building Services Engineers. This afternoon, I'm delighted to be your chair for this panel session on keeping our COP26 promises net zero. As we're all aware, this isn't the only conference that's happening at the moment. Indeed, with an anticipated 20,000 attendees from 200 countries, the COP26 conference is widely thought to be one of the most important conferences of the decade. Now, over the past few days of COP26, we've already heard quite a few very big numbers, and I'd like to share a few of these with you. First number I'd like to share is 300,000. So already there's been a global partnership announced to cut emissions of the world's second worst warming gas, methane, by 30% by 2030. Now, even this measure will mean that across America alone, there'll be 300,000 gas and oil well sites that need some serious attention. The second number is £14 billion. That's a lot of money. In the first major deal at COP26, 100 leaders have promised to end and reverse deforestation by 2030. And this pledge includes almost £14 billion of public and private funds. The third number I want to share with you is even bigger, $130 trillion. And of course, this is the proposal led by Mark Carney to move trillions of dollars of private capital, indeed some 40% of global assets worldwide, towards technologies that lower and eradicate carbon emissions. Some very big numbers indeed. Now, of course, COP26 isn't over, and I'm sure there'll be more big numbers before it is over. But there is one small number that I think we all need to concentrate both throughout the conference and beyond, and that's 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that's what I think we really do need to concentrate on. So whilst it's the negotiators and politicians at COP26 who will agree the actions that we will take to slow, halt, or even reverse the damage that mankind is sustaining on planet Earth, our common home, as George Clark called it yesterday in the opening presentation, it is future generations who will have to deal with the long-term consequences of our success or failure. It's also the young engineers of today who will deliver the solutions that can safeguard our future. This conference is an opportunity for the younger generation to challenge our politicians and the industry's leaders to make good on our promises. I'm delighted to be joined today by 5 young engineers and scientists, 5 leading lights of our industry, indeed 5 future leaders, who will discuss their ambitions and expectations for COP26, the role that they play in finding solutions, and also share some of their views on how to create a better future. So I'd like to introduce the panelists now. We've got Lucy Sherburn. Lucy's a graduate engineer at FairHeat and also the current CIBSE ASHRAE Graduate of the Year. Welcome, Lucy. We also have Jennifer Cox, an electrical engineer with AECOM and the CIBSE ASHRAE Graduate of the Year 2020. Welcome, Jennifer. We have Hannah Tweedle, and Hannah is an operations analyst at MCS, the Microgeneration Certification Scheme, and also a participant in the Future Leaders Programme. Welcome, Hannah. We have Alex Hughes, operations analyst at MCS and participant as well in the Future Leaders Programme. Welcome, Alex. And we have Jess Hardwick, affairs and policy lead at the National Grid, and also another participant in the Future Leaders Programme. So welcome to you, Jess, and welcome to you all. So I think to start the discussion today, I'd like to start by asking the panelists, what does COP26 mean to you, especially in regard to your role in our industry? And I think for that question, I'd like to start with Lucy, if I may. Lucy.
Of course. And I think I'm going to echo everybody in this panel. And I think, like all of us, the outcomes of this congregation will likely shape my future career and also my future quality of life, I guess. And it's probably the most important meeting of our generation, and almost definitely one of the most important meetings of future generations as well. And I kind of hope politicians are taking lessons from the COVID pandemic on this, about how they took that unprecedented circumstance and forced the international community to come together on a common goal. And I really hope this conference will act as a way for the international community to come together to action some real change on this, and not just come out with a series of grand announcements or big numbers, and do really kind of push forward with these actions. In terms of my role at FairHeat, FairHeat are a specialist consultancy who work with heat networks, specifically kind of quality assurance of heat networks. So the outcomes of this congregation in respect to decarbonisation of heat in the UK will almost definitely kind of majorly impact my organisation, and I think the speed of that will be the biggest impact. We've been quite heavily involved in the heat network industry in the UK, and I think as a business, as the industry will grow, and hopefully it will begin to grow as a consequence of this congregation and recent kind of legislation, we'll still be able to have that strong presence in the industry as well.
Very good. Thank you very much, Lucy. And now I'd like to ask the same question, I think next to Jennifer, please. Jennifer, can you share your views on this, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm going to completely agree with everything Lucy just said. Sorry, excuse me. It's an opportunity to start again and start afresh. It's a good opportunity for us to look at ourselves as engineers, as built environment professionals, and to reassess the way that we approach our design. We can no longer, unfortunately, look at aspects around sustainability and energy efficiency and net zero as a nice to have, as an added extra that sometimes it can be seen to certain clients and stuff that we work for, and we want to make sure that this is fundamental. This is what we're working for. This is standard, and I think this is a great opportunity to start, as I said, to start fresh and to start that as a standard, and particularly as young professionals in our industry. This is the rest of our career. You know, there's such a personal and professional impact that this will have on us. I think it's important to look at it as a real opportunity to start again and start fresh.
Very good, thank you. I think that's a really nice way to put it. It is an opportunity to look, start afresh and look forward, because I think an awful lot of this is framed in looking backwards, but we must really look forward. So thank you, Jennifer, that's great. Hannah, what does COP26 mean to you?
I definitely echo what the two girls before me definitely said. I think COP26 will definitely shape our generation's life, and the meetings and the actions that will come out of this will have a huge impact going forward. I definitely think it means more collaboration within the industry itself, and hopefully it's going to lead to more action and some change from government bodies to address climate change and a transition to a greener world. Within MCS ourselves, so we're a standards organisation for renewable technologies, so this is definitely going to have a huge impact on our industry, and this is something that I think is definitely needed.
Brilliant, thanks. I love those words: collaboration, action, change. I think they're really fantastic viewpoint to have. So thank you very much. Now, Jess, would you like to share your views on what COP26 means to you, please?
Yeah, sure. So I definitely agree that, it's one of the most important meetings for our generation and for future generations. And for my sort of role at National Grid Electricity System Operator as public affairs and policy, I mean, it's really exciting to see all these really ambitious pledges and commitments get announced, but then there needs to be some real sort of robust policy and strategies that underpin this. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out following COP and sort of taking that away and looking at what that means in reality for our role as the operator for GB's electricity system. I think another really important thing for me is that climate change is a global problem and a global challenge, and COP is a real opportunity to give those countries who are on the front line of experiencing the impacts of the climate emergency a platform to come and tell those stories and actually, bring to life what's happening as a result of climate change. And I sort of really hope that that adds a sense of urgency to the issue, and it kind of really brings it home for people from countries that maybe aren't experiencing the same sort of impacts that countries on the front line are.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Yeah, very good. Okay, well, thank you very much. Lots in there. But before we get into some of the other questions, I'd like to ask Alex. Alex, what does COP26 mean to you in your work as well?
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I'll definitely echo all those points. Similar to what Hannah said, when I think of COP, I think of global collaboration, and I think with the pandemic, we've seen how difficult that was in terms of a global crisis and how important global collaboration and cooperation was. David Attenborough hit the nail on the head on day one of the summit for me by saying, if working apart, we're a force powerful enough to destabilise our planet, then surely working together, we're powerful enough to save it. So that really stuck with me. I think COP26 should be an opportunity to move from less talking to more action and to help bring ambitions forward to reduce emissions as we face these net zero targets. I also think it's important for there to be space at the summit for all voices to be heard. There does need to be that inclusion, particularly from those who are disproportionately affected by climate change. So there's that saying, same storm but different boats. And I think from an MCS perspective, a critical aspect that needs to be thought about is how we're going to break that dependency we have on fossil fuels, and how policy and finance mechanisms, for example, can help combat some of the barriers and encourage uptake of renewable technologies and building across all sectors. And then also linking to the future leaders side of things, I think one of the key ingredients for the success of COP26 will be political leadership.
Very good. Thank you very much. I do like that that outlook of less talk and more action. And I guess we should all judge the success of COP26 on what is said, but what actions are implemented and what is achieved. So very, very, very good point. Brilliant. So now I'd like to move into asking some specific questions of you, our panelists, to delve a little bit deeper into your views of COP26, if you don't mind. And first of all, I'd like to ask a question of Jess. So Jess, what do you think is one of the biggest challenges facing the government in the really important transition to net zero?
Sure.
Yes.
So I think at the moment the government's facing a really big challenge of needing to get the British public to buy into the changes and the transformations that need to take place so that we can get to net zero by 2050. I think they're operating against a really difficult backdrop where we see the cost of living increasing for all, we're seeing energy prices rising, hikes in national insurance, the end of the universal credit uplift, and this is kind of meaning that people have less disposable income and day-to-day living is becoming much more of a concern for a lot of the population. I also don't feel like the message that the cost of inaction is more than the cost of action is landing. I think we're seeing the government struggle to land on an approach for how net zero is funded. It's very much still a debate around whether costs are placed on the burden of the taxpayer or whether consumers should be paying for the transition. But I really believe that one of the things the government has to get right is making sure that there is a fair and just transition for everyone. I think the government really needs to make sure that both intergenerational and intragenerational equity sit at the core of tackling the climate crisis. I strongly believe the government's got a duty of care to make sure that sort of any policy and legislation enacted today doesn't negatively impact future generations, and future generations shouldn't be liable for picking up the pieces of problems caused by today's generations. I think the government needs to make sure that everyone from sort of all different social and economic backgrounds are taken on this journey with a particular focus on vulnerable consumers. I worry that there's a risk that this won't happen and people might get left behind. I think the government needs to be making sure that climate policies are affordable and they're achievable, and that the cost of the transition is distributed sort of equitably among businesses and people based on, you know, what they can afford to pay, their environmental impact and sort of their potential for gain. I think in some respects they are pitching a little bit of a hard sell sometimes, because they're trying to get the population to invest in these expensive new low emissions technologies such as heat pumps when not a single member of the cabinet has one. I think the government really needs to be stepping up their game in this respect. I think they need to be building trust among the British public and getting buy-in for these new transformational technologies, and they need to be sort of leading the way and flying the flag. They can't just sort of be expecting everybody to go out and invest in these new technologies if they're kind of not, you know, leading the way. I think as well, there also really needs to be a fair and just transition within workers. I think those who've traditionally worked in oil and gas industries need to have the opportunities to reskill and move into the renewable sectors. And I think there's sort of a lot of work to be done by government around thinking about how we best sort of reskill and redeploy people into those sort of equivalent high skill, high earning, engaging jobs, but in a sort of greener future. So yeah, just to summarise, I think the biggest challenge is, you know, ensuring that really fair and just transition and making sure that whatever decisions get made today don't negatively impact future generations.
I think you've made some excellent points there, and I'm sure many of these points are being discussed as we talk at COP26, and they will for quite some time, because these are massive challenges, aren't they? And they are challenges that are going to take a huge amount of effort for a lot of people, and it will affect people whether in different social economic classes, whether in different locations, different economies, will affect everyone differently. And it's to try to get that the fairness across all of those groups of people is going to be a real challenge. So yes, I think you hit the nail on the head there. So thank you very much, Jess. Next, I'd like to ask a question of Lucy, actually. So Lucy, clearly it's really important that we work towards the decarbonisation of heat. Heat has such a big negative impact on producing large amounts of CO2 emissions. I think I read one report estimating it, heat to contribute, I think it's 37% of the total CO2 emissions in the UK. Given your role, Lucy, how do you hope that COP26 can help to accelerate the decarbonisation of heat?
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I think you've made it really clear there that heat is such a huge challenge. Some of the largest carbon emissions, as you say, come from heat. And I really hope that COP26 is kind of highlighting to people that there is this real need to tackle climate change. And I don't know about everyone else, but I feel like recently, just in general, people are now starting to realise they're actually going to have to take action. We can't just kind of sit there and twiddle our thumbs anymore and hope it's kind of going to just naturally sort itself out. So yeah, I hope that the awareness that COP26 is bringing to the challenge, recent strategies released by the government, so the heat and building strategies, I'm hoping that these sorts of things are going to start acting as a catalyst to accelerate the actions required to take by the industry and by kind of consumers as well to decarbonise heat. And I think we need to start thinking about really far into the future. I think we need to start realising that the steps we take today and almost immediately are going to be the most important. And we need the government to give clear guidance and legislation and investment out of this congregation that focuses on the pragmatic actions we can take immediately and that are proven to work. So things like heat pumps and heat networks and energy efficient savings, such as insulating your home and replacing your windows, and even just good commissioning of systems. I think we really need to focus on those things immediately, because the steps we take now will really kind of help have that biggest impact in the future. And I think, touched on before, it's difficult. The heat and building strategy is a good first steps, but we need some clearer guidance on how we're going to fund these things. And like you say, it's all great saying we need to put heat pumps in our homes, but actually, who can afford these to put these in? Is it going to fall on the government, the taxpayer, or is it just going to fall on the domestic occupier? And they're expensive. And as much as we're having grants come through for things like heat pumps, they only cover, I think, 90,000 heat pumps over 3 years, and that's a tiny dent. I think there's like 25 million gas boilers in the country. So it's really, I think we need some more clearer guidance and investment and subsidies, I guess, on these strategies. And I also think, touching back to taking immediate steps and not kind of looking too far in the future, I really don't think we have time to wait around for 5-10 years for some solutions to be kind of proven or not proven. I think it's a huge risk that I don't think we can afford to take in terms of either carbon capture and storage and hydrogen. There's a lot of talk about hydrogen, but I think we need to really start focusing on the steps we can take right now, and not ones that might work in 10 years' time.
Very good, thank you. No, I completely agree, and yeah, we certainly need to use the technology that's available now. And yes, more big numbers. It's great to talk about millions of pounds that are being provided to provide support to install heat pumps. When you break it down and you work out it's only 90,000 a year, then it does remind us all that it's not going to be the grand solution that we actually really need, is it? I'd like to bring Alex into this discussion, actually. On Alex, obviously working at Microgeneration Certification Scheme, MCS. How important do you think that deployment of low carbon heat technologies, such as heat pumps, will be as we face our journey to net zero?
Yeah, so just echoing some of Lucy's points there, and mentioned earlier by myself. So a critical part to delivering a low carbon society is to break that reliance we have on fossil fuels, and our heating systems do need to be decarbonised, and heat pumps do have a huge role to play. I think, going back to the consumer awareness side of things, I don't think it's so much of a technological barrier with heat pumps, because they're tried and tested. It's more like physiological and people's perspectives of it, but they are effective. They're a reliable alternative to sort of your traditional fossil fuel heating systems, and they can reduce carbon emissions and save homeowners money on the bills. Of course, despite this and the benefits, the deployment is low, and we are very conscious at MCS of the barriers, one being cost. Again, things like the boiler upgrade scheme, which just been announced, obviously that will help tackle costs, but there's still the remaining costs that the homeowners have to fund. And then it doesn't really take into account other elements of like retrofitting on homes as well. So for example, a heat pump may not be appropriate on a property that doesn't have sufficient insulation. So it sort of lacks those elements as well. Another big one that we're aware of is the skills gap. So I think on the BBC News last night, I think there's over 70,000 boiler fitters, but there's just over 1,000 heat pump installers. So we really need to help tackle that skills gap and, train up the installers and make that future workforce. In areas of Europe, particularly Norway, they've already welcome widespread deployment of heat pumps, and this success has triggered, the Climate Change Committee to recommend mass deployment in the UK. And in the government's 10-point plan, I think the target is 600,000 heat pump installations a year by 2028. But of course, there's no point having these targets if the infrastructure and the policy framework isn't in place to help us achieve that.
No, absolutely. It all needs to be there to support the deployment, doesn't it? So that's some very good points. Now, you mentioned consumer awareness, and I think Jess mentioned that none of the members of the cabinet have any heat pumps installed in their properties, as far as we know. Might have to fact check that. I don't know. Consumer awareness is must be really important, mustn't it? Hannah, what are your thoughts on the importance of consumer awareness of low carbon measures overall, and in helping us to deliver net zero?
I think consumer awareness is one of the main things we need to focus on within COP, and that should be one of the main outcomes. That is how we are going to meet the targets. At the end of the day, this is our generation's fight to get to net zero, and one of the ways we're going to do that is by talking about these technologies, creating awareness for consumers about what the technologies can do. As Alex said previously, the technology is there, but the awareness is not. That's how we can deploy more heat pumps, get to that 60,000 heat pumps a year goal by 2028, which, when you think about it now, it's nearly 6 years away, and there's only 1,000 heat pump installers across the UK. That needs to expand a huge amount to meet them goals. And there's no point, as Alex said, setting them goals if we're not going to meet them. And consumer awareness will create demand, and demand will create more installers, which will create more installations and will help net zero. And I think that's one of the main factors within this industry right now is consumer awareness, and that just needs to be a number one target for everyone, I think.
Yeah, yes, very, very true. I was just trying to quickly work out, some of these statistics that are rapidly coming in. We've only got 1,000 heat pump installers. We got targets of 600,000 a year. We've got funds or subsidies for 90,000. It doesn't quite stack up at the moment, does it? It sounds as though for the heat pumps, we need really the industry and government to get aligned here and to take more coordinated steps to take action and to affect change, as someone has already said this afternoon. So yeah, lots to do. I'd like to move to Jennifer, if I may. Jennifer, we've heard of a lot about lots of different technologies that are available. We've heard about the importance of consumer awareness about the technologies. I mean, you're a consulting engineer. You design systems and provide solutions for multiple clients. How do you see your role as a young engineer to help your clients and industry as a whole to meet the CO2 reduction targets?
It can be as a young engineer incredibly daunting when you hear these conversations, which are fundamental to have and very, very interesting listening to all the other panelists there. But you do sometimes struggle and think, what can I realistically do in my company? How can I impact actual change? I'm not part of these discussions. The point I would say is that you are more fundamental than you might think. So I know that in my role, I'm very much you come into starting, whether it be engineering, building services, however it is you come into the industry, and we are realizing that a lot of the skills that have already been mentioned are something that young engineers are coming in through university, through apprenticeship schemes, however that might be. With these skills, they're knowing that things like PVs and heat pumps are a standard way of heat and design and generating electricity. And we just need to make sure that some of the decision makers within companies are aware of this. And within AECOM, we have a lot of work doing at the moment in including young engineers in these conversations. So making sure that they understand what the company's net zero plan is. They are in the discussions with clients where design decisions are being made, and they can recommend these. They can say, to their project managers, to their clients, this is a good solution. This is the sustainable solution. This is our solution. It has to be. So I think it's the way that young engineers are in a position really to be a fundamental part of that discussion, and it's not to be intimidated by having that discussion.
Very good. Well, and I think that's you've taken us up to the 30 minutes. Sorry, Jennifer. So thank you very, and you've left us with a bit of inspiration there. I think that all five of you have demonstrated brilliantly the enthusiasm, passion, and gives us a huge amount of hope for the future. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference programme. Thank you.